Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nidhi Hegde, Interim Executive Director at the American Economic Liberties Project. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this timely and hopeful conversation on the Google antitrust trials and the future of journalism. By now, it is a well-known fact that journalism is in a state of crisis. Too often, however, this reality is presented as an inevitable result of technological change. Such simplistic thinking, though, overlooks the ways in which specific companies have acquired and wielded economic power to starve newspapers of revenue. As today's panelists will explain, shuttered newspapers, local news deserts, and painful journalist layoffs are not an inevitable casualty of the internet. In large part, they are the result of years of blatant monopolization by a small number of big tech giants, namely Google, that policymakers have failed to stop. But it's all not so bleak. Google's moment of legal reckoning has finally come. Last December, a jury unanimously ruled Google an illegal monopolist in a private lawsuit regarding its App Store practices. Earlier this month, in a historic win for DOJ's Antitrust Division led by Jonathan Kanter, a federal judge ruled that Google illegally monopolized the online search market through anti-competitive deals with distributors like Apple. And in little over 10 days, mark your calendars, on September 9th, trial will begin in the second Department of Justice case against Google, this one concerning the market for online advertising exchanges. This particular trial will have a significant impact for the future of the journalism industry. And we've assembled a great panel of experts with deep expertise in journalism as well as the tech industry to answer questions like, why does this case matter? How has Google's monopoly power affected the way we access information, how newsrooms stay afloat, and the work of being a journalist? And will antitrust wins and remedies be enough, or do we also need lawmakers to step up additional efforts to provide solutions to regulate Google? I'll let our panel of experts take it from here, but one thing is for certain, we are at an important juncture in this fight against one of the biggest corporate monopolies, and we are winning. The results of these trials, and more importantly, the remedies matter if we are serious about breaking up Google's power. And what is at stake is our economic liberty and our very democracy. So we're calling on all of you to pay close attention and follow along as the trial unfolds. Thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator and one of the experts on this topic, Economic Liberty's Senior Legal Counsel, Lee Hepner. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Nidhi. I'm Lee Hepner, Senior Legal Counsel at American Economic Liberties Project, and I'm delighted to be here moderating today's discussion. As Nidhi mentioned, we've assembled a fantastic group of speakers, each representing a distinct perspective on why this trial matters so much, and specifically what it means for journalism and, by extension, our very system of societal accountability, our democracy. So this trial begins on September 9th in the Eastern District of Virginia. We'll get into this a little bit, but much like Google's black box of digital advertising, the courtroom is going to be somewhat difficult to access here. Part of why we're here is to make the case that this is one of the most important antitrust trials of our time, and it really necessitates the depth of reporting that so many of journalists and members of the public have contributed to the Google search case, which ended recently. It's fundamentally about how information flows across our society, and it gets at the root problem of Google's suffocating control over the internet's revenue generator. Without further ado, let me introduce our panelists and the CEO of Digital Content Next, a trade association that manages relationships between digital content companies ranging from the New York Times to Condé Nast, ESPN, Vox, and Politico with consumers and marketers. If you haven't been following Jason's Twitter account, you absolutely should. He has been pouring over thousands of exhibits in the Google adtech case as they're coming out and providing critical insights that deserve to be elevated in the public discourse. Next, we have Danielle Coffey. She's the president and CEO of the News Media Alliance, which represents 2,000 news and magazine media outlets worldwide and is dedicated to ensuring a vibrant future for news. And that includes building a more favorable legislative and regulatory environment for the digital distribution of news content. Prior to that, Danielle was vice president and general counsel at the Telecommunications Industry Association, and she currently serves on the board of directors of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Next up, we have Helene Olin, who I'm so proud to call one of my colleagues here at the American Economic Liberties Project. Helene joined AELP from the Washington Post and has 3 decades of experience on the front lines of being a working journalist. She's appeared on The Daily Show, Frontline, C-SPAN, the BBC, All Things Considered, basically everywhere else, and is a current contributor to MSNBC. And then finally, a man who may need no introduction here, but Roger McNamee is a tech venture capitalist and early investor in Facebook, who really wrote the book on that platform's major issues and problematic role in shaping modern American politics and culture. Roger has seen this industry from all sides. And I personally think of Roger not just as a great musician, but as one of the more important cultural and political thinkers of our time. And I'm so glad that Roger has time to join us today. So it's a great pleasure to have you all. Why don't we jump right in? I ask each of you to prepare comments on why this trial is so important. And I want to start by kicking it over to Jason to answer that question and also really tell us what this trial is about. So Jason, floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Lee, thank you for having me here. In terms of the case that's about to kick off September 9th, the adtech antitrust case, which has been called US versus Google 2. This case focuses on their dominance over the advertising supply chain. So particularly the software and the data that fuel what is now a mostly real-time live auction of the advertising space across the open web. And so whereas the prior case was search, this is the advertising supply chain. Let's talk about market power in terms of Google's role there across that supply chain. So their dominance isn't just in any single piece of the supply chain. From the buy side to the sell side, they have market power. And importantly, the case, I think, starts with the decision we just had in the search case. So it will lead in with, Google had from the search case, we learned about 98% of the mobile queries. So about 98% of the queries across mobile and all the data that comes with that, Google controlled. And so the search case wasn't just about search, it was about the search text advertising market and all that advertising that gets bought. And then now we turn to how they use that demand and that market power to dominate the rest of the supply chain. And so if we take that to the other extreme, the publisher side, which is an important part of this discussion today, the evidence shows that Google has 91% of the ad server software for publishers that's commonly used. And so 90% plus on the sell side, 90% plus on the buy side, and each of the pieces in between kind of underscoring the vast reach and the influence that Google has over the advertising marketplace. And I think I'll emphasize too that there'll probably be early on in this case some questions about the market itself that happened in the search case. And I think Google will lose that like they did in the search case in a matter of days. They will try to say they compete with Facebook and TikTok and these various closed platforms. But this case is about open web display advertising as the market. And there's voluminous evidence that that is the market inside, outside of Google. So the second piece of the case that I think is important to emphasize is the role of data. It was kind of underplayed in the opinion from the search case. I think it will be a big part of the remedies. But when you've got 98% of the queries and all the data, it helps you entrench your market power throughout the supply chain and also then into AI and other emerging areas. Google sees, according to the evidence, over 86% of the advertising transactions that happen on the open web. 86%. So they have access to a wealth of information that, simply put, no one else has. And this ability to kind of see the vast majority of the transactions, it gives them leverage and really what's been called insider information. If you compare to the stock market, where if you're on buy side, sell side, and you see everything, then you're able to do things in terms of how you design the marketplace. We'll, I think, learn about in 2016, this kind of critical moment. We just learned it was called Project Narnia 2, but it was where Google merged all of its search data with its advertising data, with its Android data, with its browsing data, put it all together, location data, so that they have that merged data across our lives to inform kind of those decisions of the market. The word surveillance is used very early on in the complaint and in the conclusion. So I think that'll be a big piece. It creates an imbalance in the marketplace, raising concerns about fairness. and competition. So that's second, the data. And then let's get to the abuse piece, because it's not illegal to have a monopoly. We don't have really tight privacy laws in America. But if you abuse that monopoly power, we're going to see a lot of information on how Google's abused their dominance across the supply chain and how they've designed those auctions. There'll be a lot of like code words, and I don't know which ones will get focused on by the Justice Department, but they set the rules. And it's not just how the auctions work in terms of first price auction, second price auction, and various rules about the auctions, but even like the timing of the bids. Like if you think about, and I think this kind of makes Flash Boys look kind of boring, frankly, if you saw that movie or read the book. Like they're able to put partners closer to the actual auction so that they can have an advantage from the speed of their bids. So they get more bids and win more. And so there was a lot of press around Jedi Blue, which was the deal between Facebook and Google several years ago. And Google, as recently as in the last month, has been falsely telling reporters off the record that that's no longer part of these cases. It absolutely is. We're going to have Facebook testifying, and we're going to have, I think, evidence around that deal between Google and Facebook, which was about, at least in part, timing of Facebook's bids. And so whether it's timing of auctions, moving margins around, tying different parts of the ad stack together, we're going to see a pattern of behavior in which they've been able to kind of entrench their position in the marketplace and stifle competition and really suck the welfare out of the supply chain, and at the harm to journalism and publishers too, which I think probably is a good transition point. So thank you, Lee.
Thanks for that, Jason. I mean, just a couple points there. I mean, Jedi Blue is fascinating to me because I think we're in the Google search case, we had this contract between Google and Apple that allowed them to, quote, act as one. Here we kind of have something like that, which is this agreement between Google and Facebook. When Facebook tried, or when Meta tried to innovate in the digital ad space, Google intervened. And instead of innovation in this space, what we saw was a deal to, kind of act as one. Facebook has all these special privileges from Google now in exchange for it not doing header bidding or innovating in the ad tech space. So I really think that that's an interesting part of this trial, and agree that it's going to be a big part of this, whether Google wants it to be or not. Why don't I kick it over to Danielle? Danielle, I mean, you've seen, the journalism industry evolve over the past quarter century. I kind of want to hear from you how you have perceived Google's rise to power impacting the journalism industry.
Thanks, Lee. I'm happy to share. And one of the reasons I'm happy to share is because I think the history of what we've been through is important. And not just so that folks are aware and what is actually in the real world impacting, which is journalism, and that's a very real thing. You're going to hear even more from Helene, but also so that we address the problem and the core of the problem instead of the symptoms, because the symptoms are not going to stop unless we actually tackle this here and now. And what's interesting is that the cases that the DOJ has brought and did an amazing job on actually kind of tell our story. And the reason why is because we began our partnership, whatever you want to call it, with Google many years ago. And when it began, our content was used, it was scraped, it was crawled, it was repackaged, and it was sold to customers, their users, our readers, and didn't quite displace us at the time because we were getting something out of it. We were getting traffic back. And Larry Page said in 2004, in fact, I looked it up right before this because I always misquote him and say it wrong. He said, "We want to get you out of Google and to the right place as fast as possible." And that was what they were really doing at the time. But then over a period of a decade, what they did was, and we articulated this and documented it, the evidence that we found from our members, and submitted it to the DOJ as evidence of anti-competitive practices that don't do that. They don't redirect the users to our content so that we can monetize it and make money to reinvest in quality journalism. Instead, what they began doing was anti-competitive practices that we documented, such as AMP, where 39% of users do not become subscribers like they do in organic search. AMP was created by Google. We looked at featured snippets. We looked at rich text images, all of the ways in which they summarize our content so that users just don't click through. Now it's AI overviews where we see a future where there may not be a business model for our industry. So that's really what we found that went along with the search case narrative, because that's what we experienced. That's the reality that we lived through. And then with the second case on ad tech, it adds insult to injury and is the story of the second half of the equation, which is when users do click through, we can't even monetize our content adequately because they own the advertising ecosystem. So from our perspective as a harmed party here, because we're news publishers, we're a subset of a class of the harmed party. That Jason just went through and talked about in great detail about the cases and their findings, or so far. And so if we're receiving this harm, a remedy we would seek is something that looks like a fair marketplace, as though there was competition. What we would be receiving if we weren't, didn't have to adhere to their exclusionary one-way terms. AI overviews is not something that we would ever opt into if we had a choice, because it replaces us and our journalists. It summarizes the articles that we spend a lot of money, and humans actually spend a lot of time to produce. And then it competes with our own content and scrapes us without permission to do it. So that's a harm that we receive. And then on the ad tech side, 70% of up to 70% of every advertising dollar goes to Google. And so in that world, it becomes incredibly difficult to sustain a business model such as ours that not only produces quality content to communities and on topics that are critical to people's daily lives around the country and around the world, frankly, but also because it's going to ultimately harm their own ecosystem, because that becomes sustainable if they can't feed off of quality information. Over time, that will not, we will have a standard that is so low for the information that people are receiving across our country. That's not what we should strive for as an industry, as a society, as a government, as a country. So if we want to turn things around, we have a moment now to address the core of the problem with other, I believe we'll talk about later, other more urgent remedies that we could deal with both legislatively and otherwise now. But we have this moment in time where we can address these critical issues and the dominant anti-competitive harmful practices of this one company that has continued to be above the law for the last decades. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to uplift a data point here that you spoke to, Danielle, which is that roughly half of Americans report getting news from social media now. 65% get their news from a search engine like Google, and Google is kind of the search engine. That's such a radical shift in how people have received information, received news historically. And I think that's kind of part of the story here in the ad tech trial, because that shift has allowed Google to obtain more consumer data, more user data, and translate that into an ad monopoly, allegedly, that has been extremely lucrative for Google. You see Google's, ad revenues tripling over the past decade. And I'll stop there before I get into maybe what Helene wants to talk about. I don't want to, but why don't I turn it over to Helene, who again has had the most front. Yes, please,
on
please.
What you just said, because it's true. And Roger and I were talking about it previously, and I promised I would make this point because I agree with it. It's not just that they control the information, it's that they're financially incentivized to personalize in a way that does not necessarily meet the standard of care we would ever adhere to. So that's very dangerous when they're financially incentivized to shape and control the flow of information. That is very scary. That should scare us all. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No. Thank you. This is a conversation. I mean, dangerous and extremely lucrative. So, that's a threatening feedback loop. Why don't I kick it over to Helene, who's again got so much experience on the front lines of being a working journalist and has seen the industry evolve from that perspective, and to talk about these issues. Go for it, Helene.
And thank you, Lee, and thank you, Danielle, because that's actually a great transition to what I want to talk about. I am here to talk about an industry that is going away, journalism, and dying right now, not because technological change came and destroyed it, like blacksmithing, which is the story people are often told, but because somebody came along and took away all the money to support it, a sort of form of a technological muddle. And of course, that is because of things like Google. Ad revenue for the journalism industry peaked in 2006. I'm sorry, is that okay? Ad revenue peaked in 2006 for the newspaper industry. Perhaps not coincidentally, and I'm being sarcastic here, Google bought DoubleClick in 2007, becoming distributor and broker. Google displayed the news on its own properties, effectively stealing revenue, and was able to do that quite well because it was all-knowing and all-seeing, because it was basically spying on us, right? Since that time, a third of all newspapers have fully shut down. Newspaper employment is down by more than 50% from the millennium. State House coverage has declined by a third between 2013 and 2022 alone. To put some flesh on that statistic, the population of Texas has grown by double digits over the past 20 years, almost 50% actually. But the journalists covering the state decreased by 65%. So why does this matter? It matters because of what happens to our society. Local news, the lifeblood of journalism, is increasingly defunct and in danger. There's lots of stories going uncovered. And keep in mind, what these stories are and what connects them to journalism isn't Donald Trump's latest blowhard comments. It's the local suburban city council. It's the Little League game. It's the high school debate team. It's finding out what the police siren at 2 a.m. was all about. It's the annual Halloween contest of painting the local store windows. Not getting this leads to distrust. It leads to distrust because we don't know what's going on in the world around us. It leads to distrust because meeting journalists in the course of going about your life is actually how we learn to trust journalism. Most of us are not in Washington. We learn to trust it from getting coverage of the Little League game. It also leads to distrust because lack of journalism leads to increased corruption. There are studies showing now that as journalism has decreased in communities and has completely gone away in some, the number of indictments of public officials actually goes up because nobody is really minding the store. So I want to take a minute here and talk about why other models can't quite solve this, as has been pitched. Nonprofits are great, but they're not going to save journalism. First, there's simply not enough billionaires around, unfortunately. Sad, but true in this case. And also, what does get funded is, while very important, because it's often investigative reporting, or it's often local city government, it's not actually the stuff that sometimes connects people right in, which is the local, Little League game. It is the school bond issue. And this stuff is important. The subscriber model ignores the fact that there was reasons journalism developed as an ad-based, paid-for business. It gave independence in a way that subscribers can't. It subsidized a lot of the reporting. Subscribers often wanted entertainment. They wanted sports. They didn't necessarily really subscribe for the investigative work, but that's what they also got along with it because it paid for it. You simply can't get enough subscribers for the vast majority of papers to make up for this. It also leads to a backwards model, to put it as the best way to describe it, where you start catering to the subscribers or you start chasing clicks online. And this in turn results in sort of catering to readers, covering news, not because it's important or necessary sometimes, but because it will get the most clicks. And nobody has really quite, with few exceptions, figured out a way around this. So why don't you hear about this? In part, journalists are very bad advocates for themselves. We're brought up to sort of idealize neutrality and being nonpartisan. And neutrality means neutrality, right? Many don't see themselves as experts. You get into this field in part because you like asking questions, because you don't see yourself as all-knowing. So that almost counts against saying, wait a second, this is really wrong. Third, the people who are covering the area itself often are a little too enmeshed in it, conversely. In Washington, they talk about regulatory capture. If you're kidnapped, they talk about the Stockholm syndrome. Here, sometimes it just becomes a form of identifying with it. If all you're doing all day is speaking to people in the tech sector, eventually you're going to agree with a lot of their viewpoint. And finally, for the publishers, there's also fear of retaliation, fear of getting downgraded in search results, and a feeling that you need to take what you can get, which just basically happened in California with the demise, more or less, of the tax on Google to pay for journalism. So what is this like? And I want to conclude here because I know I'm running out of time. It's about what's this like for journalists? It's about all the stories that'll never get covered. It's about all the leads that won't be followed up on because there's nobody there to do it. It's the loss of time for noodling around because that's how we find stories often. You simply don't just stumble into them all the time. You have to do a lot of work, and sometimes it doesn't pan out. And as the finances have gone away, you can't do that. And it's the inability for many to earn a living. If journalism has decreased, if the number of newspaper journalists have decreased by 50%, that's more people who can't get by or have to leave the industry. And that brings me back to the beginning here. It's a rotten feeling knowing an industry is going away and dying, not because technological change came and rendered it obsolete, but because somebody came along and basically stole all the money. Google earns $240 billion a year from its online ad biz. 90% of digital advertising money goes to Google and Meta, leaving scraps for journalism. Lee, back to you.
I promise this isn't all doom and gloom, but Helene, I thought that just resonated on such a emotional level. I have a couple notes here from our conversation. There's a story that in 2017, it was the Wall Street Journal switched to a subscription model and refused to allow Google search users to read its content for free. And this was their attempt. This was the Wall Street Journal attempting to grab back some of the revenue that had been scraped away from it by Google's dominant search engine and dominant ad tech business. And what did Google do? Google downgraded the status of the newspaper in its search rankings in response to this. So Wall Street Journal attempts to get more revenue for itself and to grab back, claw back, and to pivot to actually a new type of model that can sustain some of the larger outlets in particular. And Google responded by deranking it in its Google search listings. That is the power that Google has. When Google did that, traffic to the Wall Street Journal plummeted by 44%. And so this is really, you can see that as Google providing some sort of value to newspapers and to online journalism and directing traffic, or you can see this as Google exerting an extraordinary amount of control and really holding hostage its trading partners, whether it's news publishers or in the instance of the California law that you were talking about, holding the state legislature hostage to avoid a common sense regulation that has been tried and tested and proven in Australia, in Canada, and lawmakers were forced to abandon it. I mean, this is testament to Google's extraordinary power and the democratic and political implications of this, which I think is a good segue to turn it over to Roger, who really thinks in kind of the bigger strokes here and can explain in an interesting way, I think, what this all means.
Thank you, Lee. So here's the thing. I think we're at the beginning of a massive change. So I have nothing but optimism right now. And that is really the product of events over the last 12 months. So there are two things that I think we want to keep in mind historically that put us where we are today. The first was a change in philosophy that the country underwent in the late 70s and the early 80s, where we abandoned 200 years of the country's culture, which was built about preventing monopoly. Remember the Boston Tea Party? That was all a rebellion against monopoly because we associated monopoly with monarchy and authoritarianism. And the country was completely committed to that. But in the late 70s, a right-wing philosophy came to the fore that changed the interpretation of antitrust laws and essentially said that concentrated economic power was fine as long as prices didn't go up, which ignores a zillion other really important values that the country historically had prioritized, and basically said, hey, look, we love concentrated economic power. And we've been living with the consequences of that ever since. Fortunately, the tools and the cultural shift necessary to change that has already begun. Now, for Google specifically, it really begins in 2000. And if you have not read it, Professor Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, is really the decisive volume on this topic. She named it, she described it, and the essential point is Google realized that every time people are on an electronic system, they leave footprints behind. And if you gather all the footprints and you analyze them, you can first develop hypotheses about society as a whole, and then identify exactly where each individual user is relative to the population. From that, you can not just predict their behavior, but because you control the menus and the applications that they're using and can close them off, you can actually steer them towards economically desirable behaviors. Now, Google was the only one who was really able to figure this out in the first decade of the millennium. But Facebook figured it out in 2013. The key for them was bringing in all of the third-party data that it bought from brokers. And the reason this matters so much is because data essentially enables power imbalances. The people who have all the data can, to a degree, affect the behavior of those whose data they have. And if you concentrate enough of that together, it gives you power not just over those individuals, but over society as a whole. And that's really what we're arguing about in US v. Google 1, US v. Google 2, and then 3, 4, 5, the ones that will follow. Why? Because Google has essentially created overlapping monopolies. It has search, it has ad tech, but it also has dominant share in browser and half a dozen other categories, all of which are interrelated. All this data is combined. And so they can literally move profits around at will. That's what this case is about. It's about moving profits around so in ways that essentially deprive economic opportunity from the people whose content is essential to Google's business. So this is fundamentally about depriving those who create of a livelihood to empower those who have control of the data. You're going to see exactly the same thing play out with generative artificial intelligence, which is the same game plan, but just applied in a slightly different way. So super important. The key thing to understand is the power imbalance that surveillance of capitalists by creating monopolies ends innovation. Every new product since the financial crisis out of Silicon Valley has been created to enhance the power of the monopolists. None of the benefits go to the users, right? All the benefits go to them. So our mental mindset that we had for 50 years before that, which was that new technology was a good thing and that new was always better, that's just wrong. Every new thing Silicon Valley's produced since 2009 has essentially made your life worse. It may have made some things more convenient, but at great cost to somebody else. And so that's what these battles are about. Okay, and it's really important as you look at them to appreciate that Google is just patient zero. But we have to apply this throughout the economy. There's a big case of General Motors and OnStar, gathering all this data on drivers involuntarily and selling it. That kind of stuff just has to stop. And the good news is politically, the pendulum has already begun to swing. The Biden-Harris administration, well, actually began under Trump, began the process of using antitrust to rein in concentrated economic power. And that process has got full flower. It's something we absolutely need to keep going. And then we need to extend it by recognizing that shareholders are not the only constituency that executives should be focused on. That they need to focus on society, democracy, public health, and all these other things. I'll rest it right there.
Thanks, Roger. And I do kind of share your optimism. I think optimism is a survival strategy in this world, and it's why we're all here advocating around this case. The data piece is absolutely critical. It's both how Google reinforces its monopoly in the ad space and forces advertisers and publishers onto its network, but it's also how it boxes out competing ad exchanges and what innovation might look like in a way that gets advertisers to have more bang for their buck, that directs more profits to journalism. Jason, I thought you were going to bring up the point about the comparison to the New York Stock Exchange, that Google is taking a 22% cut of every ad dollar spent on its ad exchange. That would be the equivalent of the New York Stock Exchange taking $22,000 of every $100,000 trade on the exchange. It's just unreal how ludicrous that seems given that comparison. But I want to pivot into the optimistic, what the world could look like. And really picking up on Roger's optimism, what is the ideal result of this case? What is the rosy future of journalism that this case promises? And I want to start with Jason.
Thank you. And it's funny when you make the stock market analogy, because that first came up in the case from Google's own descriptions of their business, right? They compared themselves to wanting to be all sides of the stock exchange. They also said, by the way, to Roger's points, one of their employees, it's literally on page 2 of the findings of fact for going into the trial, that they are an authoritarian intermediary. That's what they want to be. And so a solution, and the optimism here, is breaking that up, the authoritarian intermediary, which cannot self-regulate itself. And I think, from a legislative perspective, I think it's really important. Roger pointed out that the Trump administration brought the original case on the search case, at least. And the adtech case has a state version that was brought by the Texas state AG, Republican Ken Starr. And so very, very bipartisan movements are happening and in this way. And that's amazing. And there's bipartisan legislation called the America Act that was brought by Senator Lee and Senator Klobuchar, that has a slew of everybody from Senator Ted Cruz to Elizabeth Warren on it. So it's fully bipartisan. And what that does, it's very simple legislation that eliminates conflicts of interest and says you can't be dominant on both the buy side and the sell side. You can't be above, I think it was $10 billion of trading on either side. If you are, you need to structurally separate. And so that leads you to Google in a heartbeat, and a few others. And it also says if you're of a certain size, you have to have a best interest obligation to the buyer or the seller. You have to work on their behalf and their best interest, which is just simple stuff that we learned in the stock market a century ago that now is being applied here. And so very, very optimistic about that legislation probably being discussed as soon as maybe before we even have a decision in this case in Virginia.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore that, the America Act is a really important tool. The case could get at the same result, which is, separating out the publisher side platform, the advertiser side platform, and that digital ad exchange. Google right now is dominant in that entire supply chain, and breaking that up and separating that. We advocate for competition and breakups because they can oxygenate a marketplace and drive innovation where it's not currently existing.
And firewall the data.
Jason.
Firewall the data too, right? Ring fence the data that Roger's talking about, so you can't share it.
Absolutely. And I think that could achieve great potential, whether it's a regulatory sponsor through the enforcement, which is going to take, of course, quite some time. Danielle, what do you think is the kind of ideal future for journalism that could flow from this case or a regulatory response?
Well, I would agree with what Jason said as far as we support a structural remedy such as breaking up the company because of what I said originally, which is you have to attack the core of the problem. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to chase the symptoms and try to put out a million fires when you could actually have an opportunity to take care of it in one fell swoop. As far as our industry, I think it's a little bit different. And I say that because two newspapers are dying every week and leaving communities with a news desert, causing all the problems that Helene talked about. When news deserts happen, it leads to corruption, so on and so forth. It's not good for our country. So there's a more urgent solution, which we've been working on since 2017 with the US Congress, that's a federal version of what Canada Australia and through a patchwork, even Europe did, to have a backstop so that you can actually compel compensation from a monopoly who will not share revenues, who will reap the benefit of scraping, repackaging, and selling our content, and the bargaining code that allows us to have a fighting chance, because perversely, we can't come together and for leverage because we can't collude under the antitrust rules, which work against us. The law would actually level the playing field and address this broken marketplace. In California, we were on the cusp of passage. And I'll just say legislators, and as amazing as our champion, Assembly Member Buffy Wicks was, Governor Newsom preferred a negotiated settlement. The $45 million that will go to journalists and be divided equally, no selection by the government or Google itself, which is how it exists today, will broadly be shared amongst journalists equally in California. But the problem with what happened in California is that even though the totals actually ended up equaling what Canadian news publishers got per year, it was not all paid for by Google. The state had to step in and supplement the fund because, and frankly, this was a demonstration of Google's market power and their ability to sway every environment that they're in, which is why we call on the federal government to step in and make sure that news publishers are compensated with fair market value. And I also support what Jason was talking about, which is the American Act, the adtech bill. All of these legislative measures, in addition to the courts and potential remedies, I think are important so that we can turn things around at the core and not keep addressing everything into the future with whatever comes next. And I think we have a bright future. I know there's some negativity, but I actually am very optimistic about our industry eventually being able to thrive, own our own fate, and continue to do what we do for the country.
Well, yeah, it's hard not to approach all of this with a certain degree of negativity and cynicism. I mean, it's been a bloodbath. I mean, and Danielle and Helene, you know that better than anybody. Helene, what do you think is the future of journalism if the Justice Department is successful in this case, or if these regulations come to form? What's your ideal kind of restoration of the breadth and depth of being a working journalist?
Sorry about that. Mostly want to say I agree with Danielle, but about a lot of what she said. But I would add, what happened to journalism? The old print model of display ads is not coming back, right? That's gone. But what happened to journalism is that went away at the same time. Google and social media platforms basically took away their lifeblood financing. And sort of held them hostage at the same time. Right. So the ability to innovate was basically gone. The finances weren't there. Google punished you if you did it, and so on down the line. And so if you can get more money coming back in, which would indeed happen with, say, something like the tax that had been proposed in California, which would happen should Google be broken up, which I totally support, which would, happen if we could get this sort of logjam, get our economy back functioning in a fair and free manner so that all people can prosper, not just the largest corporations, is you will see innovation that will rise to meet the moment. And I truly believe this, because when you have the funds to do it, people feel free to experiment. They're not reacting out of fear. They're reacting out of a search for greater prosperity. And that makes an enormous difference. And that makes an enormous difference in areas well beyond journalism, I should say. And so I actually am sort of optimistic that things can turn around and will turn around as the sort of Google logjam stranglehold is broken over the journalism field.
And I just want to shout out that one voice that's not represented here is the advertisers. And I'll do a shout out for a group called Check My Ads that is going to be covering this trial very closely. And they too want innovation in this space. And to Helene, to your point, what the innovation could look like, advertisers want to know where their dollars are going, what consumers they are reaching. They are so often walled off from who they are advertising to, who their consumer is, and the ability to develop direct relationships between advertisers and publishers again, and to disintermediate this system that Google has controlled from a top-down sense, but to create those one-to-one relationships between advertisers and publishers again. I mean, I think that there could be tremendous innovation there, and there's certainly a desire for it. Roger, do you want to kind of speak to what this means going forward?
So I want to cover two aspects of this thing. The first part of this I think is so important is that culturally the United States got out of the business of holding rich people responsible for their actions. And over a period of 40 years, people just kept pushing the frontiers of what they could get away with to the point where they've done massive harm. So I think internet platforms have undermined democracy, they've undermined public health, they've undermined public safety, just the list goes on and on and on. And what I find so exciting about the present moment is that politically you can feel the pendulum swinging. There is actually a constituency that has bipartisan elements for doing something about this. And I think the best single way to hold people to account is to change incentives. And we talked earlier about Jedi Blue, which is something that Jason brought up. Jedi Blue was a situation that developed when there's a kind of advertising called header bidding that Facebook pretended it was going to enter with an independent product. And so Google, in order to prevent that from happening, carved up the market in an agreement with Facebook. That is called price fixing. When I ran the evidence in the case, which was brought initially by the state of Texas by a Republican AG, past Republican head of the Antitrust Division, he described it as the cleanest example of a Section 1 Sherman Act violation he'd ever seen. Now, the key thing about Section 1 Sherman Act is that price fixing, you don't actually have to prove that it worked. You only have to prove that they tried to do it. And if you do, the standard penalty is 1 to 3 years in a federal prison for the executives involved. Now, I think bringing that case that way against the executives of Google and Facebook would have a cleansing effect on the incentives of this industry. The second point I want to make is that antitrust is as American as apple pie. And in the tech industry, every major industry of the last 70 years has been created as a consequence of an antitrust action. The original 1956 AT&T consent decree created Silicon Valley itself by putting the transistor in the public domain, creating a semiconductor industry. It also created an independent computer industry. The IBM case separated software from hardware and led to personal computers. The subsequent AT&T cases created data networking, the internet, cellular telephony, and the Microsoft case created Google and everything that followed that. Investors will eventually figure out that antitrust is going to create massive value for them. And when that happens, this will move very, very rapidly. And so I'm extremely optimistic because I think both the political and the financial, the piece that I don't have figured out, and I've spent a lot of time on this, what is the model for journalism? Because there is a lot of learned helplessness in this industry, and there's a lot of Stockholm syndrome in this industry. And we see it every day in the coverage of the major media of the political moment. They don't recognize what's going on. They aren't even covering these cases. And we're going to have to find a real solution, and we're going to need a fresh set of eyes on that problem. But I'm extremely optimistic about that too, because there's a ton of smart people on this call and in other venues who can help put that together.
I think that's absolutely right. We don't need to predict what the future holds. What we are doing with tools like Antitrust is ensuring that future innovation benefits from the full breadth of competition that we should expect in a healthy market. And that's how historically we've gotten so much innovation historically, whether it was in the wake of the breakup of AT&T or the Microsoft antitrust case a quarter century ago. I think that holds great promise.
Well, Lee, I think you can state with reasonable confidence that there has not been either an empowering technology or a massive productivity increasing technology since the iPhone. That's 2007. I don't think, monopolization of the tech industry has been harmful in every possible way. And we have nothing to fear. These are engineers. You break these things up, you force them to compete, lots of good stuff is going to happen.
Right. And I just want to plug up one thing, another thing that riffs off what you said, Roger, which is that antitrust is as American as or is as American as pie. I think was the colloquialism, but it's true. I mean, and antitrust does not punish success. And Google's rise to dominance through innovation and on the merits is a good thing. But what we've seen here too, and what we haven't really addressed in this call, is that so much of Google's monopoly power in the digital ad tech space was the result of acquisitions. When they saw, DoubleClick for sale, they bought it. When they saw the publisher sides for sale, they bought it. And it's that acquisition to monopoly that is particularly problematic because it really stifles innovation before it begins. And that is something that antitrust can address.
A bit on the
yeah.
point. Yeah. Roger made a good point, and everything he just said actually was very thoughtful. But and it goes to what you're saying, and this is a broken marketplace. So even in a broken marketplace, you can have a functional business model. You can have the best, you can have a great product. Like we do have a great product, of course. The demand for it speaks for itself. It's exponentially rose the past 10 years while our revenues have declined in the opposite trajectory. So it's a demonstration that there's something wrong here and that there's a direct nexus between the cause of the anti-competitive practices and the effect of harm to publishers. So as far as the business model operating in a broken marketplace, that's nearly impossible. And it's proven if you just look at other content industries. You don't tell Beyonce to dance better or sing better. It's a functional marketplace. She gets paid by Spotify regardless of, if there's demand for her content, you get payment. That's how business works. That's why we have so many Republicans that support the notion of antitrust muscle being flexed here, because Google has gone beyond the bounds of what is permissible. And they're not just big, they're big and they're bad, and it's bad behavior. And that's what's being corrected. And I think that'll be to the benefit of those who are forced to operate in this space with this partner, this behemoth, under the terms that they have to. And I like what Roger also said about how it's caused, technology is supposed to be so amazing and so great. But look at the death trail you look at the harm that's been caused over the years, and we can't ignore that. And I'm glad to see that the courts aren't ignoring that. There's a consumer harm here.
That might be as good a point to end it as any, unless Jason or Helene, you have any final words. But I do want to just reiterate again, this trial starts on September 9th. Everybody on this call is an expert in their own field and an expert on this case. It is going to be challenging to report on for a number of reasons, including that the Eastern District of Virginia has very strict rules about bringing electronics into the courtroom. So if you are hoping to make the trek into the courtroom, keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that we are resources, and we will be elevating narratives over the course of the month-long trial that is set to begin on September 9th. And I'm tremendously excited about this. I again want to express my gratitude to all of the panelists. And don't hesitate to reach out. I think all of our information is public enough that you can find us, and we're here to talk and explain and be equal parts optimistic and proud of the work that the Justice Department is doing here. So thank you so much.